The air in the sterile, soundproofed conference room was thick with the scent of ozone and the unspoken tension of 1,000 unseen pressures. Victor Korg, once a name synonymous with unshakable power and limitless ambition, sat at the head of a gleaming obsidian table. But the table, like his empire, now felt less like a throne and more like an interrogation slab. His custom-tailored suit, usually a symbol of his impeccable taste and authority, now seemed to hang heavy on his shoulders, a stark contrast to the haggard lines etched around his eyes. "Mr. Korg," a voice, calm and utterly devoid of emotion, echoed from the unseen speaker. "The evidence is overwhelming. Years of environmental violations, systematic tax evasion, bribery, obstruction of justice, the list goes on. This isn't just about Korg Industries anymore. It's about a pattern of deep-seated corruption that permeated every level of your operation and extended far beyond." Victor's gaze, once piercing, was now distant, fixed on a spot on the pristine wall. His jaw was clenched, a muscle twitching almost imperceptibly. He saw the headlines flashing in his mind's eye. Korg Empire crumbles. Tycoon indicted on dozens of charges. Power brokers rein ends. The public, once awed by his wealth, now bayed for his blood, fueled by the relentless media storm that had been brewing for months. A sharp, almost metallic clink broke the silence. Victor flinched, his eyes darting to the sound. Two federal marshals, stoic and unyielding, stood by the door, their presence a palpable barrier against the world he once dominated. They weren't there to protect him. They were there to ensure he remained. "Do you have anything to say, Mr. Korg?" the voice prompted again, this time with a subtle undertone of finality. Victor slowly raised his head, his eyes finally meeting the blank lens of a camera in the corner. His lips parted, a dry, rasping sound escaping, but no words formed. Only a profound, terrifying realization. This was the end. His absolute power, his carefully constructed illusion of invincibility, had shattered. The fall was complete. 6 months earlier, the panoramic view from Eliza Reed's corner office on the 70th floor of the Aurora Tower was a testament to her ascent. The city sprawled beneath her like a meticulously designed circuit board, humming with the energy of innovation and ambition. Eliza, CEO of Aurora Global, didn't just oversee a tech empire. She sculpted the future. Her company was at the vanguard of sustainable AI, quantum computing, and ethical data management, fields where vision and integrity were as crucial as code. At 38, she commanded respect not just for her groundbreaking achievements, but for the unwavering moral compass that guided her every decision in the cutthroat world of Silicon Valley. Today, the hum of the city felt particularly charged. The final details for the biggest acquisition of the decade were being ironed out. A $5 billion deal with Korg Industries. Not a tech giant, but an old money conglomerate with vast holdings in renewable energy infrastructure. A perfect, synergistic merger, at least on paper, that would propel Aurora Global into new stratospheres. Eliza had overseen every aspect, from the initial due diligence to the most intricate negotiation clauses. Her team, a diverse assembly of the sharpest minds in their respective fields, moved with the synchronized precision of a well-oiled machine, reflecting her leadership. Eliza herself exuded an understated power. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, her posture was effortlessly regal. Her hair, styled in sleek braids, framed a face that was both intelligent and intensely focused, with eyes that missed nothing. She wasn't prone to grand gestures or flamboyant displays of authority. Her presence alone was enough to command attention. She believed in the quiet strength of strategy, the meticulous dissection of problems, and the unwavering pursuit of justice, even when it seemed out of reach. These were not just professional tenets, but deeply personal philosophies forged through a lifetime of navigating systems that often underestimated or sought to diminish her. The legal team from Korg has signed off on the last addendum. Eliza, her chief of staff, a young, impeccably organized woman named Anya, announced, her voice a controlled hum of excitement. All systems go for the signing ceremony tonight at the Korg estate. Eliza nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. Excellent, Anya. Confirm our security detail and ensure all our data backups are fully encrypted and off-site. Standard procedure, but crucial given the stakes. She paused, her gaze drifting back to the city below, and double-checked the charity donation clause. I want to be certain their commitment to the environmental fund is legally binding and transparent. Anya scribbled a note. Already done. Everything's airtight. You truly are a master, Eliza. $5 billion. This changes everything. It changes a lot, Eliza corrected gently, her gaze hardening slightly. But it doesn't change who we are or what we stand for. This deal is about leveraging Korg's infrastructure for a greener future, not about succumbing to their old-world influence. We bring the vision, they bring the pipes. She knew Korg Industries had a reputation, a faint, lingering scent of old-school, aggressive business tactics. But her due diligence had been thorough, her legal team unyielding. This was a calculated risk, taken for the greater good. A light knock on the door signaled the arrival of her personal driver. Eliza gathered her slim, custom-made briefcase, her movements fluid and purposeful. The evening ahead was more than a celebration. It was the symbolic handshake that would bind two vastly different empires. She anticipated the customary pleasantries, the toasts, the forced camaraderie. What she did not anticipate was the venom lurking beneath the polished surface. As she stepped into the private elevator, a faint sense of unease, barely a ripple in her calm demeanor, passed over her. A premonition, perhaps, of the storm brewing just beyond the horizon of her meticulously ordered world. The Korg estate was less a house and more a fortress of old money. Sprawling across acres of manicured lawns in the exclusive hills overlooking the city, it boasted a facade of neoclassical grandeur, illuminated by hundreds of twinkling lights that made it glow like an artificial constellation. Valets in crisp uniforms navigated a fleet of luxury cars, while security personnel, discreet but omnipresent, blended into the shadows. This was not merely a home. It was a declaration of status, a monument to inherited wealth and entrenched power. Eliza stepped out of her armored sedan, the cool evening air a welcome contrast to the hum of anticipation within her. She moved with an innate grace, her presence immediately drawing a subtle shift in the energy of the arriving guests. She was a disruptor in their world, a self-made titan navigating a landscape dominated by legacies. Inside, the opulence was almost oppressive. Gilded ceilings, priceless art adorning every wall, and a symphony of chandeliers cascaded light onto a sea of designer gowns and bespoke suits. The air hummed with hushed conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the faint, melancholic strains of a live string quartet. It was a perfectly orchestrated tableau of power and privilege, where every smile felt practiced, every compliment weighed. Victor Korg, the patriarch of this gilded cage, was the quintessential magnate. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a booming laugh that seemed designed to fill large rooms, he moved through the crowd like a king holding court. He greeted Eliza with a practiced, firm handshake and a smile that reached his eyes, but not quite his soul. "Eliza, my dear, so glad you could make it. The ink on our deal will be a fine vintage indeed." He boomed, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby clusters of guests. His arms swept out, encompassing the grandeur. "Welcome to our humble abode." Eliza returned his smile, cool and composed. "Victor, it's an impressive estate, a fitting setting for such a monumental occasion." She knew how to play the game, to acknowledge the spectacle without being drawn into its pretense. Just then, a woman glided towards them, her platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. This was Margarita Korg, Victor's wife, a woman whose beauty was as sharp and unyielding as polished steel. Her smile was a thin line, betraying no genuine warmth as she extended a manicured hand to Eliza. "Ah, the brilliant Eliza Reed. I've heard so much. You're even taller in person." The compliment hung in the air, a microscopic needle prick designed to discomfit. Eliza, a woman of statuesque height, simply met Margarita's gaze evenly. "And you, Margarita, are as radiant as your reputation suggests." It was a deflection, a polite parry that offered nothing for Margarita to seize upon. Throughout the initial mingling, Margarita's passive aggression continued to manifest in subtle, insidious ways. Over cocktails, she remarked, "You know, Victor always says he admires a woman who can run a company. Though, Between you and me, I find all that tech talk terribly draining. So much more relaxing to simply manage an estate. Her tone implied that Eliza's achievements were a burden, a masculine pursuit unfitting for a woman. Later, as a waiter offered a tray of hors d'oeuvres, Margarita interjected. "Oh, Eliza, darling, are you sure you want the caviar? It's so rich. Perhaps something lighter? You wouldn't want to overindulge before such a big week." It was a thinly veiled jab at Eliza's figure, delivered with a saccharine smile that fooled no one within earshot. Eliza maintained her composure, her eyes betraying nothing of the quiet fury simmering beneath the surface. She recognized the pattern: microaggressions, veiled insults, the subtle attempts to belittle and diminish, all wrapped in the veneer of aristocratic charm. She had encountered it before 1,000 times. It was the language of those who felt threatened by her very existence, by her competence, by her skin color in their predominantly white, old-money circles. Victor, standing nearby, would offer a brief, dismissive chuckle, a silent endorsement of his wife's veiled hostilities. The air grew heavier, the carefully constructed facade of congeniality beginning to crack, at least for Eliza. She knew the deal was important, potentially world-changing. But the price of entry into this world, the quiet acceptance of such insidious disrespect, was weighing heavily on her carefully calibrated balance of priorities. She had come here to finalize a partnership, not to endure a social skirmish. But Margarita Korg, in her self-assured ignorance, was clearly just getting started. The true catalyst was yet to come. The grand ballroom, where the formal dinner and deal signing were set to take place, was a dazzling spectacle of crystal, silver, and fresh orchids. The most influential guests, a carefully curated list of industry titans, political figures, and socialites, had gathered. Eliza found herself seated at the main table, a strategic position of honor directly across from Victor Korg, and, unfortunately, beside Margarita. The dinner progressed with the usual performative elegance. Speeches were given, toasts proposed, and the $5 billion deal was lauded as a landmark achievement, a union of old power and new vision. Victor, beaming, raised his glass to Eliza, praising her astute business acumen and unparalleled drive. His words, though outwardly complimentary, carried a faint echo of surprise, as if marveling that someone like her could achieve such heights. Margarita, however, had clearly been fortifying her resolve with the free-flowing vintage champagne. Her eyes, usually cold, now held a glint of something sharper, less controlled. As the main course was cleared and a delicate dessert was served, the conversation at their end of the table turned to personal legacies and family histories. "You know, Eliza," Margarita began, her voice a little louder than necessary, drawing the attention of several nearby guests. She leaned in conspiratorially, her breath heavy with alcohol. "It's truly remarkable, isn't it? How far some people can come from humble beginnings. Victor often says it's the truly American spirit to pull oneself up by the bootstraps. Though personally," she paused, her eyes scanning Eliza's face with a condescending pity, "I always think it must be so exhausting, constantly proving yourself. Don't you ever just wish you had, well, a proper pedigree? A little something to lean on, you know, like actual family history in this country." A hush fell over the immediate vicinity of the table. The compliment had shed its disguise. This was no longer passive aggression. It was a direct, racist jab at Eliza's heritage, at the very notion of her belonging in this rarefied world. The implication was clear. She was an outsider, a parvenu, forever lacking the proper pedigree of old money and white privilege. Eliza felt a familiar, cold wave wash over her. Not panic, not fear, but a searing, righteous fury that always manifested as an unnerving stillness. Her eyes, usually warm and intelligent, turned to chips of obsidian. She looked at Margarita, then at Victor, who sat there, a slight, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips, a silent, damning endorsement of his wife's remarks. He looked away, busying himself with adjusting his cufflink, feigning disinterest. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was the faint clink of cutlery from another table. The guests at their table shifted uncomfortably, some averting their gaze, others watching with morbid fascination. No one spoke up. No one challenged Margarita. The silence was a collective endorsement of the insult, a tacit agreement that this was the natural order of things in their world. Eliza took a slow, deliberate breath. Her voice, when it finally came, was soft, dangerously calm, but cut through the hushed tension like a razor. "Margarita," she began, her eyes locked on her assailant. "I assure you, my heritage is one of immense strength, resilience, and a history far richer than any pedigree bought with inherited wealth. As for exhaustion, I find that a truly draining endeavor is dealing with narrow-mindedness and thinly veiled bigotry." Then, without another word, without a dramatic flourish or an emotional outburst, Eliza placed her napkin neatly beside her untouched dessert. She pushed her chair back, the soft scrape on the marble floor sounding deafening in the silence. She stood, her tall frame commanding the attention of the entire ballroom. She didn't look at Victor, didn't spare a glance for the gawking guests. Her eyes, however, briefly met those of a junior Korg Industries executive who looked genuinely appalled, a silent acknowledgement of the wider world's reaction to such blatant disrespect. As she turned to leave, a security guard from her own detail, alerted by an almost imperceptible signal from Eliza, was already at the door, opening it for her. "Eliza, wait." Victor Korg finally blurted out, a hint of genuine alarm replacing his smirk. "The deal? What about the deal?" Eliza paused at the threshold, turning her head slightly, her profile sharp and uncompromising. Her voice, though still quiet, carried perfectly through the stunned silence of the ballroom. "Mr. Korg," she stated, her words slow and deliberate, "there will be no deal. Aurora Global does not do business with people who harbor such primitive views, nor with those who silently endorse them. Good evening." With that, she walked out, leaving behind a ballroom full of shocked, whispering guests and a visibly stunned Victor Korg. The $5 billion deal, the culmination of months of work, had just been publicly and unequivocally canceled. But for Eliza, this was not just about a deal. It was about principle, and it was only the beginning. The hidden mechanism, carefully built over years, was now about to be activated. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and crimson as Eliza's armored sedan whisked her away from the Korg estate. Inside the sanctuary of the vehicle, the outward calm she had maintained throughout the humiliating ordeal remained unbroken. Her face was a mask of cold resolve, her mind already several steps ahead. Anya, her chief of staff, seated beside her, looked utterly distraught. "Eliza, are you all right? That was unspeakable. And the deal, $5 billion, just gone. What are we going to do?" Anya's voice was a frantic whisper. Eliza merely raised a hand, a gesture for silence. "Anya, I am perfectly fine. And the deal, as you say, is gone. But something far more important is about to begin." Her eyes, usually so expressive, were now pools of icy determination. Arriving back at Aurora Tower, Eliza bypassed her opulent CEO's suite and headed straight for a discreet, unmarked floor accessible only by a biometric scan and a specific, rotating code. This was not the public face of Aurora Global. This was her inner sanctum, the nerve center of her hidden mechanism. The room was Spartan yet technologically advanced, a single large monitor dominating one wall, several smaller screens displaying complex data streams, and a secure communications console. She moved with purpose, activating the system with a series of precise commands. The monitor flared to life, displaying a secure, encrypted network interface. "Initiate Project Chimera," Eliza dictated into a voice-activated log, her voice calm and steady. Phase 1, Data Acquisition and Profiling. Target, Korg Industries, Victor Korg, Margarita Korg, and all associated entities and individuals. Scope, comprehensive financial, legal, environmental, and social audit. Retrospective, 50 years. Priority, extreme. Anya watched, mesmerized and slightly terrified. She had heard whispers of Project Chimera, a theoretical, fail-safe protocol Eliza had been developing for years, a network of independent experts, data analysts, white-hat hackers, investigative journalists, and former government watchdogs, all bound by non-disclosure agreements and a shared commitment to justice. It was designed to dismantle systems of power that believed themselves above the law. Anya had always assumed it was a contingency plan, never imagining it would be unleashed so swiftly or with such quiet ferocity. Within minutes, encrypted messages, coded directives, and secure data packets were fanning out across the globe. Eliza's hidden mechanism wasn't a single button. It was a complex, self-aware organism designed for systemic deconstruction. First to respond was Elias Thorne, a former federal prosecutor now running a private forensic auditing firm, specializing in untangling corporate malfeasance. His message flashed on screen. Chimera activated. Ready for parameters, Eliza. What sleeping giant needs to be awakened? Next, Dr. Lena Petrova, a renowned environmental scientist with a knack for uncovering obscured ecological data, confirming Chimera. Accessing all Korg historical environmental reports. Time to dig for buried bones. Then, Marcus Ghost Chun, a cybersecurity legend who could bypass almost any digital fortress. Status: engaged. Korg's digital footprint now under microscopic analysis. Their secrets are our secrets. And finally, Sarah Vance, a Pulitzer-winning investigative journalist who had gone independent, known for her relentless pursuit of truth. Chimeras live. Sending out feelers. What's the story, Eliza? And more importantly, what's the real story? Eliza meticulously reviewed the incoming acknowledgments, her fingers dancing across the interface. Her strategy was clear. Dismantle Korg's empire not through direct confrontation, but through a slow, inexorable process of exposure. The racist humiliation was merely the final, unforgivable trigger. The underlying rot of Korg's empire, which her due diligence had hinted at but not fully exposed, was the true target. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was seeking systemic justice. The $5 billion deal had been a means to an end, a way to expand Aurora's reach. But integrity, for Eliza, was the ultimate currency. Anya, Eliza finally said, turning from the screens, her voice utterly devoid of emotion. From this moment forward, Korg Industries no longer exists on our radar as a potential partner. They exist as a case study. We will remain silent on the public front regarding the canceled deal. Let Korg think he has merely lost a business opportunity. Let him believe it's over. Anya, still grappling with the enormity of what she was witnessing, managed a shaky nod. He made a critical error tonight. Eliza continued, her eyes alight with a cold, strategic fire. He underestimated me. He mistook my composure for weakness, my professionalism for a lack of resolve. He believed his power was absolute, and that mine was merely transactional. But power, Anya, is not just about money or old names. It's about truth. And sometimes, truth needs a catalyst. Eliza looked at the vast network she had just set in motion, a force she had built precisely for moments like these. This wasn't a business decision fueled by emotion. This was the precise, calculated deployment of a mechanism designed to activate higher, impartial justice. A justice that lay far beyond the reach of Victor Korg's local, corrupted system. The invisible war had begun. The following weeks at Korg Industries were marked by a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the corporate atmosphere. At first, it was dismissible. A surprise inspection by the city's Department of Environmental Quality at a Korg-owned waste management facility in a remote industrial district. Nothing major, just a routine check, the inspectors claimed, though their questions were unusually precise, their measurements meticulous. Victor Korg's head of PR, a slick operative named Derek Vance, merely chuckled. Bureaucracy, Victor. Always stirring up dust. Nothing they haven't seen before. Victor, still fuming over the collapse of the Aurora Global deal, a loss he framed publicly as a minor strategic reevaluation rather than a catastrophic cancellation, grudgingly agreed. Fine. Just make sure they don't find anything that isn't already fixed, with a generous donation to the right campaign fund. But then came another routine visit. This time, it was the state tax authority, requesting an audit of several obscure subsidiaries that Korg Industries had acquired decades ago. These were shell companies, long dormant, seemingly innocuous. The auditors were polite but unyielding, demanding access to decades-old ledgers and digital records. Victor's CFO, a man named Arthur Hayes, who had served Korg for 20 years, began to look a shade paler. They're asking about the tax incentives from the '98 acquisition of Consolidated Metals, Victor, Arthur reported, his voice tight. That was handled. Very quietly. Victor waved a dismissive hand. Nonsense. Old news. Just tell them the records are archived off-site, inconvenient to retrieve. Offer them a small expediting fee, as usual. However, the expediting fee was politely, yet firmly, declined. The auditors insisted on full compliance. The old tricks, it seemed, weren't working as efficiently. From her vantage point, high above the city, Eliza Reed observed these nascent tremors with a cool, detached satisfaction. Her hidden mechanism was working precisely as designed. Elias Thorne's forensic team had identified historical financial irregularities, focusing on the very subsidiaries the tax authority was now scrutinizing. Dr. Lena Petrova's environmental analysis had flagged specific Korg facilities with patterns of ignored violations, now attracting the attention of local regulators. Marcus Ghost Chun had planted the digital breadcrumbs, guiding the watchdogs to the right scent without ever revealing his hand. Eliza received regular, encrypted updates from her team. Korg's PR is spinning it as unprecedented regulatory overreach, Vance reported, her tone amused. Local media is picking up on the environmental citations. Small stories for now, but the seeds are planted. Excellent, Eliza replied, reviewing a complex data visualization on her main screen, a spiderweb of connections radiating from Korg Industries, highlighting various subsidiaries, shell corporations, and their respective regulatory vulnerabilities. Keep the pressure subtle but constant. We don't want to alert them to a concerted effort. Let them believe it's just a string of unfortunate coincidences. Victor Korg, meanwhile, was starting to feel the first tendrils of discomfort. His usual contacts in City Hall and state agencies, the ones who had reliably smoothed over any inconvenient issues for decades, were now strangely unresponsive or evasive. Calls went unreturned. Favors were suddenly difficult to arrange. What the hell is going on, Arthur? Victor snarled, pacing his opulent office one afternoon. First the environmental zealots, now the tax hounds. Are we being targeted? Is this that damned Reed woman? Arthur wrung his hands. She canceled the deal, Victor. She walked away. What motive would she have to do this? It's bad for her too, losing $5 billion. Spite, Arthur. Pure, unadulterated spite. Victor slammed his fist on his polished mahogany desk. She's one of those types. Thinks she's above us. She's probably pulled some strings at her fancy tech conference networks. He dispatched Derek Vance to manage the narrative. Vance, adept at media manipulation, started planting stories in local papers about overzealous regulators stifling local industry and unnecessary burdens on job creators. For a time, it seemed to work, creating a mild public backlash against the various agencies. But Eliza's hidden mechanism had anticipated this. Sarah Vance's network of independent journalists, operating in the background, subtly amplified dissenting voices. Environmental groups, community organizers, and whistleblowers, suddenly finding their long-ignored complaints gaining traction, began speaking out. Their stories, often suppressed or dismissed by Korg-friendly local media, now found outlets willing to listen, carefully guided by Sarah's team. The accidental inspections continued, increasing in frequency and scope. A federal audit of Korg's government contracts was quietly initiated. Questions about labor practices at some of Korg's manufacturing plants started surfacing. The ripples were growing, slowly but steadily morphing into waves. Victor Korg and his old guard, accustomed to controlling the narrative and co-opting the system, found themselves facing an unprecedented, multi-front assault that felt utterly random yet devastatingly precise. He still didn't see the hand guiding it, but the feeling of being hunted, of his carefully constructed world beginning to fray at the edges, was growing increasingly undeniable. The subtle tremors around Korg Industries had now grown into more discernible rumblings. The accidental inspections escalated beyond local and state-level agencies. Federal envelopes, bearing the seals of the EPA, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and even the Department of Justice, began to arrive at the Korg Tower. These weren't mere requests for documents. They were formal notices of inquiry, subpoenas, and, in one instance, a search warrant executed by a team of federal agents at a Korg-owned chemicals plant suspected of long-term illegal dumping. Victor Korg, initially dismissive, was now visibly rattled. He summoned Arthur Hayes and Derek Vance to his private dining room. The usual spread of gourmet food untouched. What in God's name is happening, Arthur? The EPA? The DOJ? These aren't local nobodies I can handle with a phone call and a donation. Arthur, perpetually anxious, was now bordering on panic. Victor, my contacts are telling me this is different. These federal agents, they're not from the regional offices. They're coming in from headquarters, from specialized task forces. They don't seem to care about our local arrangements. Derek Vance, the unflappable PR man, found his usual smooth rhetoric faltering. The media, Victor, it's out of control. What started as small local stories are now getting picked up by national news outlets. They're talking about patterns of corporate malfeasance, potential cover-ups. We're losing control of the narrative. Eliza, operating from her secure command center, watched the unfolding chaos with the precision of a seasoned general. Elias Thorne's team had delivered a comprehensive report to the DOJ, detailing specific instances of Korg's bribery and influence peddling that skirted federal anti-corruption statutes. Dr. Lena Petrova's environmental data, cross-referenced with satellite imagery and whistleblower testimonies unearthed by Sarah Vance, had provided undeniable evidence of illegal waste disposal, directly leading to the EPA raid. Marcus Chin's digital forensics had provided the IRS with encrypted communications and hidden financial trails that painted a damning picture of tax fraud. They're reacting exactly as predicted, Eliza stated to Anya, as a live news report showed federal agents meticulously sifting through files at a Korg facility. Their local system of corruption, their absolute power, is encountering a force it cannot comprehend, let alone control. They operate on the assumption of their local immunity. We've introduced a variable they never accounted for: true impartiality. The representatives of this higher system were, by design, incorruptible by Korg's usual methods. They were federal agents with national mandates, operating under the full weight of the law, detached from the local political and financial ecosystem that Korg had so carefully cultivated. Their investigations were not swayed by local favors or threats. Victor Korg made increasingly frantic attempts to reach out to his state senators, his high-ranking judicial contacts, even a few well-placed figures in the executive branch. This is political persecution, he thundered down the phone lines. An assault on American enterprise. But the responses were tepid, hesitant. The scale of the allegations, amplified by the carefully curated media coverage, was too large, the federal involvement too direct. No one wanted to be seen defending a sinking ship. One afternoon, Victor himself was served with a subpoena to appear before a federal grand jury. The color drained from his face as he read the document. "This is a witch hunt," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "They're coming for me." Margarita, oblivious to the true nature of the storm, tried to reassure him. "Darling, it's just a little bit of bad press. It'll blow over. You always handle these things. Just find out who's behind it and make them disappear." Her words, once empowering, now sounded hollow, detached from reality. But Victor knew better. The nature of these inquiries felt different. The agents were not looking for a quick settlement. They were digging for roots. His absolute power was proving to be frighteningly localized. He had built his empire on the understanding that he controlled his immediate environment, that any challenges could be bought off, intimidated, or simply covered up. Now, a force he couldn't see, couldn't bribe, couldn't even identify, was dismantling that belief brick by painstaking brick. "They are like shadows, Victor," Arthur whispered, fear in his eyes. "They know things only we knew. It's almost as if someone told them where to look." Victor dismissed it, of course. "Paranoia, Arthur. Nobody told them anything. This is just bad luck. A string of damn coincidences." He was still clinging to the illusion of randomness, unwilling to comprehend the cold, deliberate strategy being executed against him. But the coincidences were piling up too fast. The federal agencies were not just focusing on new violations. They were meticulously uncovering a pattern of decades-old abuses, each discovery feeding into the next, building an undeniable case. The localized system of corruption, Korg's protective shell, was beginning to crack under the relentless pressure of a higher, impartial force that had been expertly unleashed. And the architect of its demise watched, unseen, patiently waiting for the walls to crumble completely. The federal investigation, Initially a series of seemingly disparate inquiries, began to coalesce into a terrifyingly coherent picture for Victor Korg. What started with environmental fines and tax audits had spiraled into a full-blown racketeering probe. The hire system wasn't just investigating Korg Industries. It was systematically mapping out the intricate web of influence and illicit dealings that Victor had painstakingly woven over decades. One morning, the local newspaper, usually a reliable mouthpiece for Korg-friendly narratives, ran a front-page story under a banner headline. Insiders revealed decades of KORG's favor bank system. The article, authored by an independent investigative collective, covertly guided by Sarah Vance, detailed how Korg had systematically cultivated relationships with local politicians, judges, police chiefs, and even media executives. It wasn't just about donations. It was about lucrative consulting fees to former city council members, exclusive advertising contracts with local news stations that ensured favorable coverage, and quiet investments in the private ventures of public officials. "This is impossible," Victor roared, throwing the newspaper across his office. "Who are these insiders? We control this paper." Derek Vance, pale and sweating, explained. "Victor, these aren't our usual local reporters. They're an independent group, funded by an anonymous grant. They've published affidavits, sealed court documents that somehow got leaked, and then there are the whistleblowers. People who worked for us, for the city, for the environmental department. They're all coming out of the woodwork now. Their stories are too specific, too detailed to dismiss." From her hidden command center, Eliza watched the dominoes fall. Elias Thorne's team had meticulously cross-referenced campaign finance records with Korg Industries contracts, identifying patterns of quid pro quo. Marcus Chun had expertly navigated the dark corners of the internet, unearthing forums where disgruntled former employees of Korg and local officials had anonymously shared their grievances and suspicions for years. Sarah Vance had then leveraged this trove of information, providing undeniable evidence to the independent journalists, meticulously verifying every claim before it hit the press. The investigation, driven by Eliza's hidden mechanism, was no longer just about Victor Korg. It was about the entire corrupt ecosystem that enabled him. Judges who had consistently ruled in Korg's favor suddenly found their own financial disclosures under scrutiny. City council members who had fast-tracked Korg's zoning permits faced uncomfortable questions about their personal real estate dealings. The local district attorney, a longtime recipient of Korg's charitable contributions, found her office being investigated for selectively prosecuting cases. "They're unraveling everything," Arthur Hayes whispered to Victor, his voice trembling. "They know about the special permits from the EPA office. They know about the campaign finance violations. They even have copies of the loan agreements with Judge Albright's son." The local, corrupted system that had protected Victor for so long was now exposed and under siege. His powerful allies, who had once formed an impenetrable shield, began to panic. They saw the federal agents, the national media, the relentless barrage of irrefutable evidence, and they began to distance themselves. Calls to Victor went unreturned. Urgent meetings were suddenly unavailable. The comfortable blanket of impunity was being ripped away, thread by agonizing thread. One evening, Victor's former confidant, a state senator he had personally bankrolled for 3 terms, called him, his voice strained. "Victor, I can't protect you anymore. This isn't just a political hit. The feds they have everything. They're talking about RICO charges. My office is being raided. My family is being threatened." He hung up abruptly, leaving Victor staring at a dead phone. Eliza received an update from Sarah Vance. "The media offensive is working. Public opinion has turned. Korg is no longer viewed as a job creator, but as a corporate predator. The stories of the everyday people affected by his environmental pollution and predatory business practices are finally getting heard." Eliza felt no personal triumph, only a quiet reaffirmation of her purpose. This wasn't about her or Margarita Korg's racism, at least not directly anymore. It was about the system, about the systemic injustice that allowed men like Victor Korg to thrive at the expense of others. Her hidden mechanism was acting as a force multiplier, giving voice to the voiceless, bringing light to the darkest corners of corporate malfeasance. Victor Korg, once the absolute ruler of his domain, now felt like a rat in a maze, constantly pursued, constantly exposed. The ground beneath his feet was crumbling. His local protectors were abandoning him, realizing that the higher system Eliza had activated was playing a different game, with different rules, and with far more severe consequences. The invisible war had escalated into an undeniable crisis, threatening not just Victor's empire, but the very foundations of his corrupt power structure. He was cornered, and the walls were closing in. The once impenetrable walls of Victor Korg's empire were now collapsing inward, brick by agonizing brick. The relentless federal investigations, fueled by the precision of Eliza's hidden mechanism and amplified by national media, had left him exposed and vulnerable. His local network of influence, once a source of comfort, was now a liability. "They've arrested Judge Albright, Victor," Arthur Hayes stammered over the phone, his voice a ragged whisper. "And the former head of the EPA's regional office. They're both cooperating, giving up everything." Victor slammed his fist on his desk, the sound echoing through his cavernous, suddenly desolate office. "Cooperating? Traitors. I paid them handsomely. They owe me loyalty." But the words rang hollow, even to his own ears. Loyalty, he was discovering, was a finite resource when faced with federal prison sentences. His attempts to fight back were failing spectacularly. He tried to unleash his PR machine, instructing Derek Vance to dig up dirt on Eliza Reed. "Find something. Anything. Fabricate it if you have to. She's black, she's a woman, she's in tech. There must be something we can use to discredit her. Accuse her of corporate espionage or a sex scandal. Anything that sticks." But Eliza's reputation was unassailable. Her company, Aurora Global, was lauded for its ethical practices and transparent operations. Any attack on her character by Korg's now-tainted media machine was immediately exposed as a desperate smear campaign by the very independent journalist Sarah Vance had empowered. The public, already turned against Korg, saw through the transparent tactics. The attempts to discredit Eliza only served to further solidify her image as a principled leader standing against corruption. Margarita, meanwhile, retreated into a furious, self-pitying rage. "This is all her fault," she shrieked one evening, throwing a crystal vase against a wall. That woman. She ruined everything. Why didn't you just let me insult her in peace? You should have fired her then, not let her walk away." Her venom, once a source of Victor's amusement, now grated on his nerves. She still couldn't grasp the scale of the disaster, blaming Eliza's race and her own petty insult rather than Victor's decades of systemic malfeasance. Victor knew better. He was starting to see the invisible threads, the cold, calculated precision with which his world was being unraveled. This wasn't just random chance, or even spite. This was a systematic attack, meticulously executed. The thought that Eliza Reed, the woman he had dismissed, had orchestrated this, was a bitter pill. His fatal underestimation of her was now clear. He had seen her as a transactional figure, a means to a $5 billion end, never as the architect of his destruction. One night, alone in his mansion, the silence amplified the gnawing dread. He walked through rooms filled with priceless artifacts, now feeling like hollow monuments to a doomed reign. He looked at his reflection in a gilded mirror, a tired, fear-ridden old man, a stark contrast to the invincible titan he had always seen. The phone rang again, a familiar number. It was his lead counsel. "Victor," the lawyer's voice was grim. "The U.S. Attorney's Office is offering a plea deal. Racketeering, conspiracy to defraud, multiple counts of bribery, and environmental crimes. It's comprehensive. They've got witnesses, documents, digital records. It's airtight. They've been building this case for years, apparently, just waiting for the right moment, the right catalyst." The lawyer didn't explicitly say Eliza Reed, but Victor heard her name in the subtext, loud and clear. "The deal requires you to cooperate, name names, or they'll throw the book at you and everyone remotely connected to you." The cooperate part was a bitter irony. He had built his empire on loyalty and silence. Now, to save himself, he would have to betray everyone. The absolute power he had once wielded had been completely inverted. He was no longer the puppet master. He was the puppet, his strings being pulled by an unseen force. Eliza, in her office, received the final update from Elias Thorne. "Project Chimera, phase complete, full case build. The U.S. Attorney's Office is ready to move. They have more than enough to secure multiple convictions, including a RICO indictment against Victor Korg and several of his key figures. The environmental groups are preparing class action lawsuits, leveraging the federal findings. A quiet satisfaction settled over Eliza. Not triumphalism, but a profound sense of equilibrium restored. She had activated the higher, impartial system, and it had delivered. Victor Korg's undoing was not a personal vendetta. It was the inevitable consequence of a system designed to expose and dismantle corruption, carefully set in motion by her. His confidence in his absolute impunity, his belief that his local power could override all, had been his ultimate downfall. The noose, expertly woven and silently tightened, was now firmly around his neck. The stage was set for the final act. Okay, I will continue with ACT 3, Judgment Day, and now move to Chapter 9, Irrefutable Evidence, and the show. The grand courtroom was packed, a crucible of public attention. Every seat in the gallery was filled, journalists jockeyed for position, and the live broadcast of the proceedings was being watched by millions across the country. Victor Korg, his once imposing figure now appearing shrunken, sat at the defense table. His tailored suit was still impeccable, but his face was a roadmap of stress, fear, and a desperate, clinging denial. Beside him sat a team of high-powered, visibly nervous defense attorneys. The prosecutor, a formidable federal attorney named Anya Sharma, began her opening statement, her voice clear and resonant. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not merely about a single incident of corporate misconduct. It is about the systematic corruption of our institutions, the abuse of power, and the betrayal of public trust spanning decades. We will present irrefutable evidence that Victor Korg, through Korg Industries, orchestrated a criminal enterprise designed to circumvent environmental regulations, evade taxes, bribe public officials, and silence any who dared to stand in his way. The full, expanded version of the scene from the prologue unfolded. But this time, the context was laid bare. One after another, witnesses took the stand. Former employees of Korg Industries, once intimidated local officials, environmental experts, and forensic accountants. Their testimonies, meticulously detailed and supported by a mountain of evidence, painted a damning portrait. The courtroom monitors displayed a torrent of data. Encrypted emails revealed specific instructions from Korg to his subordinates to falsify environmental reports, with Marcus Chin's digital forensics team having perfectly restored and authenticated them. Bank records detailed illicit payments to shell corporations controlled by public officials, meticulously traced by Elias Thorne's forensic auditors. Whistleblower testimonies, emotional accounts of intimidation and threats from individuals who had tried to expose Korg's abuses years ago, now finally given a voice, thanks to Sarah Vance's network. Satellite imagery and drone footage, provided by Dr. Lena Petrova's team, showing illegal dumping sites and pollution patterns that directly contradicted Korg Industries' official reports. Victor Korg watched, his face growing paler with each revelation. He saw his trusted allies, now turncoat witnesses, testifying against him, their faces a mixture of regret and self-preservation. Judge Albright, once a pillar of the local judiciary, now looked frail and broken as he admitted to taking bribes in exchange for favorable rulings for Korg. The former EPA regional director tearfully confessed to burying reports of Korg's illegal dumping. The local system, once so loyal, was now dissecting itself, each piece of testimony a nail in Victor's coffin. Eliza Reed was present, not on the stand, but seated quietly in the front row of the public gallery, a silent force. Her presence was understated, yet undeniable. The prosecution's evidence, the sheer volume and precision of it, was a testament to the hidden mechanism she had activated. Every piece of damning evidence, every witness who finally found the courage to speak, every data point that exposed Korg's corruption had been meticulously unearthed and orchestrated by her network. The media, initially focused on the scale of the financial crimes, now began to highlight the human cost. Stories of communities devastated by Korg's pollution, small businesses crushed by his monopolistic practices, and individuals whose lives were ruined because they dared to challenge him, filled the airwaves and online feeds. The public outrage swelled, cementing Korg's image as a heartless predator. During a particularly damning testimony about a contaminated water supply caused by a Korg plant, Victor Korg's eyes, darting around the courtroom, finally locked onto Eliza. For a brief, charged moment, their gazes met. In his eyes, there was no longer just anger or denial, but a dawning, terrifying comprehension. He finally understood. This wasn't some random string of bad luck. This wasn't just bureaucracy. This was her. She had done this. The woman he had allowed his wife to humiliate, the woman he had fatally underestimated, had orchestrated his entire downfall. A look of pure, unadulterated fear flashed across his face, quickly followed by a venomous rage. But it was too late. His local system was shattered. His absolute power was revealed as a carefully constructed house of cards. The higher, impartial system, meticulously guided by Eliza's hidden hand, was delivering its final, devastating blow. The show was almost over, and Victor Korg was the star of his own tragic, self-inflicted demise. The verdict was a mere formality now. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, a heavy, expectant blanket. Every eye was fixed on the jury foreman as he rose, clutching a slip of paper that held Victor Korg's fate. Victor sat rigid, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Margarita, banished to a less prominent seat, gripped her purse, her face a mask of anxious fury. "We the jury find the defendant, Victor Korg, guilty on all counts." The foreman's voice resonated through the room, clear and unwavering. "Guilty of racketeering, guilty of conspiracy, guilty of multiple counts of bribery, guilty of tax fraud, and guilty of egregious environmental crimes." A collective gasp swept through the gallery, followed by a ripple of murmurs that quickly swelled into a roar. Reporters scrambled, phones flashed, and the gavel of the judge slammed repeatedly, trying to restore order. Victor Korg's face, already pale, drained of all color. He looked as if he had been struck, his eyes wide with a profound, terrifying shock. His empire, his life's work, his carefully constructed persona of invincibility, had just been irrevocably shattered. The judge, a stern woman with decades of experience, then delivered the sentences. Victor Korg received the maximum allowable terms for his crimes, a lifetime behind bars. His key confederates, those who had formed the backbone of his corrupt local system, also received lengthy prison sentences, their fortunes confiscated. Korg Industries was dismantled, its assets seized to pay for environmental cleanups and restitution to victims. Margarita Korg, though not criminally indicted, found herself ostracized. Her lavish lifestyle vanished, her social standing evaporated, and her public reputation became synonymous with the racism and corruption of her husband. Eliza Reed watched the proceedings from her quiet perch, a serene satisfaction settling over her. This was not a moment of gloating, but of profound validation. The higher, impartial system had worked. Justice, long denied, had finally prevailed. She saw the faces of the victims, the environmental activists, the whistleblowers, all present in the gallery, their tears and expressions of relief a powerful testament to the impact of her actions. In the aftermath, the media hailed the verdict as a landmark case, a victory for accountability against corporate greed and systemic corruption. The stories of Victor Korg's downfall intertwined with the quiet emergence of Eliza Reed as a new kind of leader, one who didn't just innovate in technology, but championed integrity and justice. While she maintained a low public profile regarding her direct involvement in Korg's investigation, her name was whispered with respect and awe in both business and activist circles. Weeks later, in her Aurora Global office, Eliza reflected on the seismic shift. The $5 billion deal had been lost, but something far more valuable had been gained: the dismantling of a corrupt enterprise and a powerful affirmation of justice. She called a special press conference for Aurora Global, not to talk about profits or new tech, but to announce a new initiative. Today, Eliza stated to a captivated audience of journalists, Aurora Global is launching the Integrity and Innovation Fund. This fund, endowed with a significant portion of our profits and open to public donations, will serve two primary purposes. Firstly, to provide legal and financial support for whistleblowers and victims of corporate malfeasance, ensuring they have the resources to expose injustice. Secondly, It will invest in independent investigative journalism and data forensics, creating a permanent, transparent mechanism to hold powerful entities accountable. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the room. We believe that true progress is impossible without ethical foundations. The events of the past few months have shown us that even the most deeply entrenched systems of corruption can be challenged and dismantled when truth is pursued with courage and precision. We must empower the impartial forces of justice, making sure no individual or corporation ever believes themselves to be above the law, beyond reproach, or immune to the consequences of their actions. The press conference was met with resounding approval. Eliza Reed, the woman who had quietly activated the hidden mechanism, was now building an even more public and proactive one. The story concluded not with the triumph of one individual over another, but with the triumph of a principle. The catharsis was palpable, a sense that the systemic injustices, the abuses of power, and the deeply ingrained biases that often went unpunished could, in fact, be overcome. The world had witnessed the power of a strategist, a dignified professional, who, when pushed to her limits, chose not personal revenge, but to activate a higher form of justice, thereby initiating a new era of accountability.